Good. Now, can I just share my entire screen? Please let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see, but I don't know if you can zoom in a little bit.
Alright. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Alright, awesome. Okay, so in the last class, what we talked about was CSS box model, right? And I basically explained, let me just open this so I can show you. So I explained that every element in your HTML page is a box. And then I think I showed you using browser developer tools, right? I'm not sure if I did that, but if you go to your browser developer tools, how do you open browser developer tools? Just right click from inside your browser viewport and then click on inspect. Right, so if you do that and then you click on this pointer here and then you click on any of the elements, you see that it's actually a box, right? And the blue background is showing the actual border of the elements, or it's showing the content rather of the element. Right, and then I explained that every element in your every element is a box and it's made up of some parts. It's made up of the contents, the padding. I don't know if you can see this part of my screen. Yeah, it's made up of the contents, the padding, the border, and the margin. And I explained what all those different parts are. All right, let me just bring up an illustration quickly. So I'm just doing a recap of what I talked about last week. All right, so okay, so I remember I showed you this diagram, right? So the blue part here is the content of the element, and it usually has a dimension, like in pixels. For example, this example we have here is 794 pixels wide. That's the x-axis, and then 160 pixels high. That's the y-axis. I think I showed you that I explained that x-axis simply means this this axis from left to right or from right to left, while the y-axis means from up to bottom, right? So the first value that you see here, 794, is the x value, while the second value here, 160, is the y value, right? So that's the content. So every HTML element has that, and you can change that by changing the width and the height of the element, right? And then now it also has a padding. And let me just draw another diagram. So if this box now is the element, right? And then let's say the content is hello world. Alright, so I explained that the padding will be from the border to the content itself. Alright. So space, this space here, let me just draw another box. So this space here is the padding. This distance from here to here, that's the padding. And from here to here as well. Pardon the noise in my background. Sorry about that. So from here to here is also padding. Then from here to here is also padding. From this border here to the continent is also padding. Alright, so I explained that padding is usually in four directions. I said that there's padding top. Let me show you my VS Code again. So I explained that there's padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right. Right. And of course, I told you that this edge, the edge of the element, is the border. Right? And the border can be can be very thin like this, or it can also be very thick. I'm not sure if I can. Okay, let me, yeah. So you can make the border very thick, right? You can actually set the size of the border. Let me just uncomment out this CSS here. So back to our HTML page, we just have, let me remove one H1. We have one H1, one paragraph, and one span element, right? Now, most of these things usually apply to, especially when we're talking about margin and then padding, it usually applies to block elements. I explained the difference between block and inline elements. Can you guys still remember the difference between block elements and inline elements? Chisom, can you still remember?
Yes, you said a block element is a kind of element that takes the whole page space on our page. And the inline elements, they just stay on one line, like the line. They don't take the whole space.
Yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah, so inline elements usually take up as much space as they need, while block elements take the full width of the page. Right, yeah, so when we talk about margin and padding, most times it applies more to block elements than to inline elements. I've not experimented to try applying padding to span elements, so I don't know how that will come out, but most times these things apply to block elements more than span elements. Right? Sorry for the noise in my background. Right, so that's what we talked about in the last class. We also talked about margin. Right, we talked about margin. I said that margin is the difference, the space rather, between two elements. So I have this element here, this hello world. Let's assume that this is a paragraph, right? Let's assume this is a p tag. And then I have another one here, right? So the space in between these two elements here and will be called margin. Yeah. So of course, now that I'm explaining, it's very normal if you're struggling to grasp some of the concepts, right? But most of these things you completely understand them when we start using it, right? So it's very fine if you just have like a vague idea of a vague understanding of these things for now. That's very fine, right? And then what else did we talk about? So we talked about border, and then I explained, I don't know if I mentioned that this border property here is just the shorthand for border size, okay, sorry, for border width, border style, and border color. I think I mentioned that. So this line here, line 10, this line, and this line as well, or these three lines, they are equivalent to each other. They mean the same thing, right? So yeah, and then I also mentioned this star selector, right? Like the universal selector. So whenever you want styles to apply to everything on your page, that's when you use this star selector. Okay, did someone raise their hand? Okay, Rookie, go ahead. Go ahead, Rookie. Or was that a mistake? Okay, I'm guessing that was a mistake. Right, but if that wasn't a mistake, just go ahead, unmute yourself and speak. Okay, so yeah, so that's what we talked about in the last class. Right, so in this class, like I said, I mentioned on the group that we're going to be doing something more interesting. Right, so what we're going to be doing in this class is we're going to be building this page, right? So you probably recognize this is the Instagram login page, right? So I was thinking about things that we've learned so far. So I feel like the things we've learned so far is enough to build things like this, right? So HTML and CSS is actually a lot. If you know HTML and CSS, there's a lot you can do with it, right? So based on the things that we've learned, or using the things that we've learned so far, we're going to build this page, right? And we're going to be doing it together here, live on the call. All right, so we're going to be basically putting into practice everything that we've been learning up until now. All right, so let's get started. But before I go on, does anybody have anything to say? Any questions? Any comments? If you do, just raise your hand. Does anybody have anything? Okay, no. So since nobody has anything, let's go on. All right, so like I said, this is what we're going to be building. This page here, this Instagram page. This is what we're going to be building. All right, so whenever I have something like this, when I want to start working on this, ideally you would probably in an ideal situation you'll be working with a designer, right? So designer would give you something like this, and then you would also have access to some of these assets. What do I mean by assets? When I say assets, or when people say assets in web development, generally it's things like images, fonts, and things like that, and illustrations, icons, things like that. All right, so uh, first thing we need to do is we need to get this Instagram logo here. All right, so to do that, you can just do a quick Google search. I just search Instagram logo. All right, so now I'm searching for Instagram logo PNG because PNG is a image format, it's a type of image that allows you to have transparent backgrounds. That means you can place it on something else, and the background that you're placing it on is what will show. That's what I mean by that. Alright. So let's just go to this website, transparentpng.com. Okay. Alright, so I think I found it. So I typed Instagram word logo because it was giving me the other icon, right? But that's not what I wanted. I want the word logo. Alright, so I'll just click on download. Okay, and download it to my desktop. I'll just call it Instagram underscore logo. Alright, and then if I look at the picture I'm working with, yeah. So I'll need this Facebook logo icon, right? I can easily get this. I know where to get this. I'll show you this later. But I also need these two pictures here. This download on the App Store and get it on Google Play. Right. So let me see how I can get this download on the App Store. PNG. Alright, so I'll try to get two of them separately. Okay. Okay, so I can find the one for the App Store. Oh, I can even find both of them here. Awesome. So let me download this. Alright, so I'll just download this. Now, one thing I just want to, I'll just chip in now while I'm downloading this is, as a web developer, one thing that will make life easier for you is if you know graphics design to an extent, or not, should I say graphics design? Just design generally, right? Whether graphics, whether UI design, because you'd have to work with images, right? And sometimes you might need to manipulate images. So it just helps if you understand design, UI design, right? And for that, I recommend so there's, I don't know if you heard of this tool called Figma, right? Right, so Figma is a design tool and it's a UI design tool. It's something I use a lot, right? So I would advise that you guys learn this. Right? I won't be talking about this in the class because we're not going to finish this class if I start talking about every single thing. But I'll advise that you learn this on your own. And how should you do? I'm going to drop a link. I'll drop a link now. I'll drop it on the group. Right. So, but let me just show you. Uh, so on YouTube, you can just search for. Okay, Ricky, go ahead.
Um, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Eh, So is this a must to learn UI UX?
It's not a must, but it will make life easy for you. Well, let me just say yes, it's actually a must. Right? But you don't need to learn it. You don't need to learn so much. Right? You don't need to be very very good at it. But you just need to learn the basics. And the reason why is because you're going to be working with designers. In most likely, you'll be working with a designer, and if you're working with a designer, the platform that designers usually use to, okay, that's even different. That's the software, right? Figma, right? Most times, Figma is the tool that designers use, right? So you need to understand how to use that tool because when they want to give you a design, most times design will be on Figma, right? That tool I just showed you. That's where the design will be. So you need to understand how to use the tool, right? But for UI UX itself, it also helps to know the basics, right? So of course, if you are learning Figma, that's part of learning UI UX, right? So you just need to learn the basics of UI UX. You don't need to be so good at it. But if you are very good at it, that's a plus for you. That's a bonus, right? So it's not a must, but it definitely helps. Like it definitely helps, right? For example, the company I'm working with now, they don't have a separate UI UX designer, but they expect me to build something that looks fine, right? Nobody will care if you work with a company and they tell you to design a website and they don't have a UI UX designer and they tell you to design a website, you will just find somehow just make the thing look nice. And if it doesn't look nice, they will complain, right? So it just helps if you know a bit of UI UX, and it's not hard. Honestly, it's not hard. It's something you can learn in a week, right? So, but it takes long to master, right? You might learn it in a week, but you might not be very good at it. But just know the basics, right? And so I'll tell you how you can do that, right? So go to Figma and then search for Figma for beginners. I mean go to YouTube and search for Figma for beginners, right? So you'd see this playlist, right? So it says new to Figma, get started with Figma for beginners. So you can watch this tutorial, right? I'll open it and then I'll copy the link and paste it on our group now so I don't forget. And then there's another video I would recommend. There's this guy on YouTube. Um, I'm not sure if I can remember his name. Okay, UI design. All right, so yes, now you can also watch this. Oh, this is using XD. No, don't watch this. You can watch, but generally, this guy, his name is Gary Simon. The name of his channel is Design Course, Art Design Course, right? So if you watch this guy, if you watch his videos, you'd to help you to become good at design, right? And he even talks about CSS as well, right? So if you watch his videos, you become good at design and CSS. Because now the reason why you should learn UI UX design is because UI UX design is very very close with CSS. Like it's very tied to CSS. So if you know design, automatically helps you write better CSS, right? So that's why you should learn UI UX design. Right, so I'm trying to find the video that you can use. Alright, so yes. So you can use this video. Alright, so what you should do first of all is watch the video I just sent to the group on the basics of Figma. So when you are done watching that video, then now come and watch this video. I'll send the link to the group now as well. Right? Now this is not compulsory, but it will help you. Like it will really, really, really help you, right? So make sure you do this. Now I can't cover UI UX design, I can't cover Figma in this class because there's so much in web development generally, there's so much to talk about, right? You can't cover every single thing, but you would have to put in the work by yourself, right? So if you're taking the extra effort to actually watch these videos I'm recommending for you to make you a better developer, you'll be happy you did, right? Okay, so I was downloading the icons. I think I've downloaded the first one. Yeah, I've downloaded the Instagram. Okay, no, just the Instagram logo. I was about to download the App Store logo, or the App Store illustration rather. Now that I think about it, I should have just downloaded this ahead of time. Sorry for this, but I think the reason why I didn't download it ahead of time was because I wanted you guys to have an idea of how you can get the images on your own. So that means that maybe if I give you another exam, another assignment, and then I don't send the images to you, or if you just see a design online and you want to make that design, or if you want to make your own clone of Facebook or something and you want to get the icons, looking at how I'm getting the icons will help you give you an idea of how you can get the icons for your own project, right? So that was the reason why I did not download it ahead of time, right? So I've downloaded the App Store image. It just remains the Google Play image, right? Okay, so I think that's all. Let me take a look at the image again. Yeah, so we have this already, the Instagram like logo, and we have these two images, right? Then I'll show you how to get this icon, right? Later on, when we get there, I'll show you how to get the icon. All right, so the first thing I usually do when I'm starting a new project is, now like I said before in our very first class, wow, my desktop looks really messy. Okay, like I said before in our first class, that every website is actually a folder containing index.html pages and CSS files, index.html files, not index.html files, sorry, HTML files and CSS files and images and other assets, right? So every single website you see on the internet is a folder. So the first thing you should do is to create a folder, right? So I'll do that here and I'll call it Instagram clone, Instagram iPhone clone, right? Right, let me just remove the iPhone. So I'll just use this. I'll write it this way. This is Pascal case, if you remember, right? Okay, so when you've done this, next thing you want to do is you want to open this inside Visual Studio Code, right? So I'll come to Visual Studio Code and then come over to File and then click on Open Folder. And then the folder is on my desktop, right? This is it here, Instagram clone. Alright, so now you have an empty folder, right? So this is where we'll add all the pages for our website. So the first thing you need to do is add your index.html page, right? And then you can use VS Code to generate some starter code. Just press exclamation and press tab, right? And then maybe here I'll just type Instagram clone, right? And the next thing you need to do is,
what do you press for that thing?
yeah, so I pressed tab, I pressed exclamation rather, then tab. Yeah, so I can just change this to Instagram clone and then create my CSS file. I'll call this index.css as well. Then I'll link my CSS file to the page. Alright, so let me just put some code here and then go live. Alright, yeah, so now you can start working on our page. Let me just close everything else. Okay, so whenever I'm working on a page, right? Something like this. When I want to start working on this, or most people when they want to start working on this, there's something they usually do, right? I think in our last class I mentioned it, I talked about it. That there's something I told you that whether or not you write any styles in your code, by default, you're going to have some styles, some CSS styles in your page, right? I think I can show you that. So if I go to my browser now and I come here, I open my browser developer tools. Again, I think on Windows to open your browser developer tools, you press Ctrl Shift and I. Ctrl Shift and I. Right? Or you can right click, then click on inspect. Right, that's easier to remember. Right, so if I come and click on this icon here and I click on Instagram clone and I check styles, look at this. It's saying, this is an H1, right? Heading 1, level 1 heading. You can see there are some styles there already by default. Display block, font size 2em. Oh, I don't think I explained this unit em, what it means. Right, so there are different kinds of units when you are specifying sizes in CSS. There's pixel, that's px, right? Pixel. And I explained what the pixel is in the very first class. That's the tiny dots that make up every image on your screen. That's what a pixel is. And there's rem. I don't think I know the full meaning of rem, but there's rem and there's m. Okay, I think rem is responsive. But anyways, this rem, maybe I'll check it out. Full meaning of CSS rem. Okay, stands for root m, right? The unit of measurement that represents the font size of the root element, right? But anyways, this rem and this m, they represent 16 pixels. But most times I use rem actually. I don't use m, right? So I use rem, right? They represent 16 pixels. We'll talk about this more when we start talking about responsive design. Right? But mostly, I think in this video I would use pixels. I'll try to stick to pixels. But if I ever use rem, just know that one rem is equal to 16 pixels. That means that 2 rems will be equal to 32 pixels. Alright, so by default there are styles there already. There's font weight, there's padding, there's margin, there's usually a lot of styles that the browser would add for you by default, right? So that's why, and let me add one more element here. So if I add, let's say, this paragraph, just a random paragraph, right? And then I check, you'd see that there is also margin. Look at, if I highlight on this, the blue part is the actual content. The orange part is margin. Now, in my CSS, I did not specify any margin here. My CSS is practically empty, right? But here, there's margin. There's even padding itself. There's vertical padding on the y-axis, on the top and on the bottom, right? But I didn't specify anything like that, right? Here, there's no padding, just margin, right? But I didn't specify it. Now, the reason why we have that is because by default, the browser will add some styles for us. I think if I even have a paragraph inside a div, oh sorry, a div inside a paragraph, yeah, a paragraph inside a div. I think the div will even have padding by default. Okay, it doesn't have, right? But however, there are some styles that get added to your page by default. So there's something called CSS reset, right? CSS reset. So when we say, sorry, this is not how to write a comment in CSS. All right. So when we say CSS reset, what we're simply doing is we're removing the default styles, or some of, because you can't really remove everything, because some of those default styles are helpful, right? But we're removing some of the default styles that come with your HTML page so that we can use our own styles, right? So some things that you commonly find is you find padding 0, right? So to remove all the default paddings that come, so that you can choose when you want to add padding instead of CSS just adding padding for you by default. You can choose when you want to add padding. Then you also see something like margin 0, and then you see something like border. Sorry, I think I've forgotten the. No, okay, yeah. You see something like box sizing, right? Now, box sizing, I don't think I mentioned. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but it's something that you should know actually. So let me just open that on W3 Schools. Box size. Right. So by default, whenever you write, if I have a div, right, just a div in HTML, and I say, let me give the div a class name of box, right? So if I come to my CSS, I'll just comment this out for now. So if I come to my CSS and I say box, and I use the class selector box, and I say the width should be 100 pixels and the height should be 120 pixels, and I also say it should have a border width of 20 pixels, a border color of green, and the border style of solid. Now, the actual width of this box, right? In my CSS, I said it should be 100 pixels, right? But the 100 pixels is actually going to be the size of the content. Now, in this case, the content is this white box inside. That's what the content is. So, is this content that is actually 100 pixels, right? But if I to actually calculate the complete width, we're going to have to add 100 pixels plus 40 pixels. Why did I say 40 pixels? Now, let me see if I can do a diagram. A better diagram here. No. Okay. I would have used this tool, but I don't think it would be good to work with this. So I'll use Figma to give my illustration now. So just wait a minute for Figma to load. Okay, why is Figma taking forever to load? Right, but depending when Figma loads, right? So what's happening is the width, this width I specified here, this 100 pixels width, is only the width of the content, right? But at the right hand side, there's a border right, a right border, right? And the size of the border right is what? 20 pixels, because that's what I specified here. At the left hand side of the box as well, there's a border, and the size of the border is also 20 pixels. So if I add this, just basic math, 20 pixels plus 20 pixels, that's 40 pixels. Then plus 100 pixels, that's 140 pixels. So in my head, because when you are building pages, right, you might do some minor calculations. You don't have to be an expert at mathematics, but you do some minor calculations, right? So when you are trying to figure out, oh, yeah, they're trying to figure out how to write your layout, how to build your layout, right? So in my head, I might specify, oh, I want the width of the box to be 100 pixels, but the actual width to be more than 100 pixels because I specified a border. And if I even specify a padding, and I say the padding should be 10 pixels as well. So when calculating the width, I'll have to add another 20 pixels again. 10 times 2, because there'll be padding on the left, padding on the right. So the full width will be the width I specified plus the border width times 2, because there's a left border, right border, plus the padding width times 2, because there's a left padding, right padding, right? So that's because the way CSS works. Now for every element, this box sizing property by default is something called content box. And let me confirm that so that I don't tell you rubbish. Okay. Yeah. So I'm right. So by default, the box sizing property has a value of content box, right? And that behavior is what I just explained now. That the width, the complete width will have to include this width that you specify plus the size of the border plus the size of the padding. That's the default behavior of HTML elements, right? But some people don't like that, right? I don't think I like that myself, right? So a lot of times people would change this to something called border box. Now for border box, what happens is if I specify this width, that this width should be 100 pixels. Now if you look at this, if you are very observant, if you look at my page, you'll notice that the box has gotten smaller. If you look at it very well. Okay, let me do this. Let me comment this out first. Look at it, the box has gotten bigger. If I can comment it out, the box has gotten smaller. Now, the reason for that is because when I use border box, what will happen is that it will force the width of the box to actually be 100 pixels. Then you might not be wondering, okay, what about the border? What about the padding? So it's now going to remove the width for the size of the border and the size of the padding. It's going to remove it from the content. That means that the content will become smaller. Then the rest of the width will be used for the size of the border and size of the padding. Right? So a lot of times people would change this box size into border box because that's more straightforward to work with, right? So I just know that I want my box to be 100 pixels. I don't care how it happens. I don't care about the width. Of course, I care about the padding and the border, but I don't want to have to start adding padding plus border plus width to get the complete height. I just want to specify the width of the box, right? So that's why a lot of times people would change this box sizing to border box, right? So that's something that you would see commonly in CSS reset. So that's something that I like to do as well. So I'll change this to border box. Now, did my explanation about box sizing, did it make sense? Please let me know. Let me know if you have any questions. My explanation on border box, did it make sense? Okay, I don't think you guys. Okay, I'll just go on. All right, so these are some of the things that I like to do, like as part of my CSS research. Another thing I usually do is I usually change the font, right, by default to Arial, then sans serif. All right, thanks, Chisel. So you usually change the font to Arial and then sans serif. That's because it just looks better than the default font, which is serif. All right, so after doing the CSS reset, then we can now start building our page. All right, so the approach I usually take is that I usually first of all write all the HTML. Right, so when I've written all the HTML, then I'll now start writing my CSS. Of course, you don't have to do it that way, right? But that helps, right? So look at this now. The first thing I'll do is you see that it has a background, right? This has a background here. All right, so I want to get the color of that background. Now this is where something like Figma would come in handy, because there's something called the color picker. I don't know if you guys know what that is, right? But color picker allows you to get the color of any get a color from any picture, right? Or from virtually anywhere, from any picture, right? In this case now it's a picture, right? So this is Figma, right? Don't worry about how it works, right? Once you start watching the video I sent to you, you would understand the interface of Figma, right? But I just need to get the color. This is the picture that I opened before. So I want to get the color of this background, right? So I can use a color picker to do that. Right, so I'll open the color picker now. All right, so this is the color here. I don't know if you can see it. FA. And I explained how to set colors in CSS. I don't know if that was the last class, but I explained how to do that. Right. So what I'll do is, sorry, have I talked to you guys about background color property before? Have I mentioned it? I think I should have. Yes, I should. I've definitely mentioned it. All right. So using that background color property, right, and the color will be FA. Right. It has to start with the ash, unless it won't work. All right. So let's check our page. Okay. So FA is really close to. Is really close to pure white. So you might not notice, but if you look at the inspector, yeah, if you look at the browser developer tools, you see that the color has changed here. So FA, right? So it's not pure white, it's slightly gray. Right? So when you're building pages like this, try to pay attention to details, right? So someone might just look at this and be like, oh, it's pure white, but it's actually not pure white. It's a shade of white, right? But however, if you look at this box here, this inner box is actually pure white, right? So there's a difference. So that's why you need to pay attention to details as a front-end developer or as a web developer generally, right? So now the next thing is there's this box here, this box. So we need to make this box. And now this box now has other elements. It has Instagram image, has an input, another input, then a button, then this divider and the other stuff here. So let's create this box here. Now just the HTML for now, right? So for that, we'll just create a div. Funny enough, I already created. Okay, let's just clear all this. Right. So once you create this box here, this first box. So to do that, we'll create a div. And we'll give the div a class of, let's call it box. Now keep in mind that you can use a class more than once. So that means that it's possible that this first box here can have a class of box, can be a div with a class of box. This other one here, because if you notice, this kind of looks similar. They both have a white background and there's this gray border, right, and some padding. Now padding is the space. In this case, padding is the space between this content and the border, and that's padding, right? So we'll make this first box a div with a class of box. And then inside that, we now have an image. We have the Instagram image, right? So I already downloaded the Instagram image. So what I'll do is I'll copy that from my desktop. Okay. Okay, yeah, this is it, yeah. So I'll copy that into my folder, right? But I won't copy it directly. I want to create a folder, a new folder called images. So I'll paste that picture inside images, right? So I think I can do that. I can just copy the image from my desktop. And I can come to VS Code and Control V. Okay, that's not working. So to copy the images, you can just do that from your file explorer, right? So just click on copy, then I open the folder, then go to the images folder and then paste it there. All right. So I have the image here, Instagram underscore logo. All right. So to add an image, like I said in our previous classes, you just use the image tag, and then the image tag has a property of SRC, which stands for source. All right. Now I want someone to tell me the value that will be here. Okay, I don't just want someone, I want someone in particular, and I want Chisom to tell me what will I put here. Now I have an images folder, and then inside the images folder I have the picture Instagram underscore logo, right? So what's going to be the value of my source attribute here? Now if your network is bad and you can't speak, you can just type it in the chat box. That's fine as well. Right, so I'll be waiting for your response, Chisom. So what will be the value of the source attribute?
Here, value will be / images, then another / the Instagram logo.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes. So apart from the source attributes, Abdullah, which other attributes should I have add to my image element? Abdullah, are you there? Okay. All right. So I'll move on. Right. So apart from the source attributes, right, another attribute that you should add is the alt attribute. Now, and I said that this alt attribute is good for accessibility, right? So for the alt attribute, I'll just type. So in the alt attributes, what you're meant to type is you're meant to type a description of the image. That's what it's meant to be there. A description of the image, so that if someone is viewing your web page on their phone or anywhere and the image doesn't show, that description is meant to tell the person what that picture was meant to show. So in our case here, it's meant to be Instagram logo, right? So that's a good alt, a good value for alt. Now so let's look at our page. All right, so if you notice now, the logo is very, 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 very huge, very huge, right? So I just want to get a rough estimate of how large it is here. Again, I'm using Figma, although this might not be accurate because the picture is okay. Sorry, give me a second. I'm doing some magic here. All right, so don't be intimidated by all this I'm doing. If you're actually working with a designer, they will give you the actual size of this that you're meant to use, right? Once you learn Figma, you understand what I mean by that, right? Because I'm not working with a real design, I'm just using a picture. That's why I have to do all this Jomo, right? So I use a width of 196 and a height of 55 pixels, right? Now I need a way to select this image, right? Right now that I think about it, instead of using a div, is there something else we can use? We talked about semantic HTML, right? So using an empty div, are there other tags that we can use, right? Now one of the tags we can use is, first of all, we can wrap everything with okay, let me not overcomplicate things, right? Let me not overcomplicate things, but this div, we can replace this div with header, right? Now usually use header when, like the name implies, header, right? The header of your page, right? Okay, so in this case, this is not really the header, right? Just the image here is the header, but this form here and the rest of it is actually not the header, so I won't do that. So I'll just use an empty div here, but I would wrap this image here inside header, because it's kind of the header of the page, right? It's telling you that, oh, this is Instagram, right? Okay, so I want to select this image here. One way I can do it is, I know that the image is inside the header tag, right? So I can give the image a class. So I can just call this, I can give it a class of logo, right? So if I want to select this in my CSS, what I'll just do is I'll type dot, which is used for the class selector, and then type logo, right? So I want to give the logo a width and height of 196 pixels by 55 pixels. So I'll say the width should be 196 pixels, the height should be 55 pixels, right? So if I save this and go to the page, right, so it looks sensible now. It doesn't look super huge like it did before. All right, so the next thing we have is, we already have this box. The box is represented with this this div here, this entire div called box that has a class of box, right? Then I wrapped the logo with this header, because the logo is actually part of the header of the website. Right? It's kind of showing the title of the website, which is Instagram, right? Then the next thing we need to have now is we need to have a form, right? So if you look at this, so a form is simply a collection of inputs, right? This is an input element here, another input element. This is a checkbox. This is a button. A button is also an input element, right? So we need to create a form, right? And to create a form, we use the form elements, right? And then inside the form, we need to have an input, and the input to be an input of type text, right? And the input has a placeholder. Now this text, remember this text inside is called a placeholder. So it says phone number, comma, username or email address, right? So we'll add that. It's placeholder, phone number, comma, username, comma, or email address. And then the next input will be a password, right? It also have a placeholder password. And then directly under that, we have this checkbox, right? And then we have a label close to it. I talked about the label element, right? So to add the checkbox, how do we do it? It's also an input with a type of check, and then beside it we have a label, and the value of the label is save login info. Alright, so if I check my page, alright, so now we see that they're all stacked on the same line, and that doesn't look nice. So for now we can just have BR. Alright, so when we type BR, that's just to push it. It means it's a line break. It means to break the line, move the next element to another line. Right, that's what it means. Alright, and then so if you look at it, it looks a bit better, right? We're not concerned about the styling for now. We're only concerned, Ricky, please mute yourself. We're only concerned about the contents, right? We're still writing the HTML, right? Right, so if you look at the image, we have this checkbox, the label, and then we have the button. Now for the label, I was about to say something, right? If you remember our previous class, labels usually have an attribute, and the attribute to be for, right? And this for is meant to be the ID of the element that this label is describing. Now the save login info label here is describing this checkbox, right? So let's give the checkbox an ID of save info, right? So the for attribute here would be save info. Now all these little things are very, very important, right? They're important for accessibility. Okay, so immediately under the save login info, we have a button, right? So just create a button. We use the button element and then type login. Alright, then under this, now this is a bit tricky, right? I'll try to look for the simplest way to do this so that we don't get confused. Alright, so one way we can do this is you can use, now if you remember when I was talking about inline and block elements, remember that inline elements can share space, right? They can all stay on the same line. But if I was to use a block element to take a new line for each time, so I want this line here, this text, and this line here to be on the same line. So that means that automatically I cannot use the block elements, because if I use a block element, they will fall into new lines, right? So one thing I can do is, first of all, I can create a block element here. I can create a div. Now the block element is to wrap everything, right? It's not for the actual content. It's to wrap this. I want to wrap this because these elements are three different things actually. There's this line, there's this text, and there's this line, right? So there are three different things. So I want to wrap them together, right? So I can use a div for that, right? And I can give it a class of let's call it divider. Then inside divider, so we have this line, right? So what I'll do is I'll create an empty div. Okay, I said I was not going to use a div. I'll create an empty span, right? Now I'll give it a class of line, right? Now you might be wondering how this empty span is going to become this, but I'll explain. By the time we start writing CSS, you understand, right? And then we have this text. Now, normally we usually use paragraphs for text, right? But in this case, I'm not going to use a paragraph because if you use a paragraph, it's going to move to a new line, right? So that means that this all will be under this line, and then this other line will now be on the third line. We don't want that, right? So we want a span instead, right? Now this is not the proper way to do it. This is just an arc. I'm just using it. I'm doing this way because what we need to. I'm doing it this way because what we need to make all these three things stay together is actually something we have not learned yet, right? So after this class, I'm going to show you, or immediately after this, I'm going to show you the proper way to style this, right? But for now, we'll just do the arc, right? So I'll use a span. Ideally, this should be a paragraph as well, but I'll use a span. Or no, it doesn't really matter if you even use a span, right? It doesn't really matter because this or is not like a. I mean, if someone is, okay, it actually no, it matters. It matters, right? So don't use a span. You shouldn't actually use a span, but I'll just use a span in this case because the reason why I said it matters now, so that you understand my line of thoughts, is because if a screen reader is reading your code, right? If you use a paragraph, okay, the screen reader will know that, oh, that's text. But if you use a span, it does not really convey. Okay, it does. It does actually. Sorry for my indecisiveness. You can use either a span or a paragraph. It doesn't matter. But I'll use a span here because it's simpler to use a span, right? So inside the span, have or. And then we also have another span, just like this one, for the second line. Alright, so immediately after that, we have this link. We have this login with Facebook link. Whose mic is that? Okay. We have this login with Facebook link, right? So that's under the divider. Remember, this divider is the divider is representing this or this dash or and dash, right? So under that we have a link, right? So for a link, we use the a tag, right? And the text to be login with Facebook, right? But you also notice that we have an icon beside the text here, right? And for that, I'll show you. There's something I talked about in our very first class. That was font awesome, right? So I'll show you how to get. Should we talk about font awesome? Okay, in this case, it doesn't really make sense to use font awesome because it's just one icon that we need, right? So you can use an image. Now for icons, there are usually a bunch of alternatives, right? You can use an image, you can use something called, you can use font awesome. Font awesome is basically fonts that look like icons. So that's called font awesome. So they're actually fonts, right? So you can style them like fonts. You can style them like the way you style text, change the color, change the background, change everything, right? But it's actually the icon itself. I don't know if that made sense. It's an icon, but it's a font. Or it's a font that looks like an icon. Sorry if I confused you. But for in our case, we just use an image. Right? So let's just search for Facebook icon PNG. I think the one we want is this box one. See, may not get exactly that typo. Right, so for icons, one very good resource is this website I'm about to open. This icons8.com. Right, you can get a lot of icons here. Right, so the icon we're looking for is this. This is what we're looking for. Okay, so just wait for this to load it. I don't know why it's taking so long to load. Okay, let me see if I can get. Let me just do another arc. Get. I don't know why this is taking long to load. Yeah, but I can actually steal the icon from Instagram itself, right? Okay, no, I can't because they used. I think they used something like font awesome, so I can't do that, unfortunately. Okay, so just have to wait for this to load. Okay. Alright, so just click on download. Let's call it Facebook underscore icon. Now download it to the folder of my website here. Yeah. Okay, so if I check open VS Code, I'll see the icon here, Facebook underscore icon, right? So I can use it in my project now, right? So here I can just add an image tag. Now images are inline, right? So it can stay directly beside this text. And oh yeah, also I don't think I mentioned. So links, a tags are blocked. Are they blocked? No, they're not blocked. They're inline actually. But you can have other tags inside links, right? You can have an image tag inside a link tag. It will work, right? Yeah. And you can also have a span inside a paragraph, right? So of course, links always have an attribute and href attributes, right? So in our case, we just put hash, right? Because we don't have any link anywhere we're going, so just put hash there, right? So the image attribute, the image tag or the image element needs to have an attribute of source, and the source is going to be the icon, Facebook icon, right? So how do we get there? / images / Facebook underscore icon dot png. Now always remember to add the extension here. It's very, very important. Without that, it won't work, right? So if I save this and go to my page, all right, so we see that it looks weird now, right? But don't worry about that for now. We'll fix everything with CSS, right? Everything looks very ugly, but for now, all you are concerned about is getting the content, right, and arranging it in a proper way, writing it using proper HTML tags, right? So that's what you're concerned with for now. All right, so okay, and I noticed that I added all this, the divider and this link inside the form, but it's not part of the form actually. So I'll remove it from the form and put it outside the form, right? But it's still inside our box. And then I want you guys to, sorry about the background noise. I want you guys to take a cue from how I'm arranging my elements. Look at how they're arranged, right? So this first div is is closest to the left, right? Then the children are closer are moved inside. They are moved to the right, right? So this header now is moved to the right. But this image is a child of header, so it's moved farther to the right than the header, right? Form and header are on the same level, so I keep them on the same line here, right? This div, the form, and the header are all on the same line because they are all direct children of this box, right? But the inputs here are children of form, so I put them on the same line. Button as well, put it on the same line. All right, so just take a cue from our arranging my code. It does makes it easier to read, right? And if you look at this line as well, you can decide to put this on a new line, right? You can decide to write it like this. You can even decide to add more new lines. You can decide to write it like this, right? So any way you choose to arrange your code, it's fine. Just make sure that it's easy to read, right? All right, so we stopped here. This login with Facebook link, right? So we have another link here, forgotten your password, right? So just use an a tag as well. It says forgotten your password. And then we have this box as well. So directly under, so if I double click on this div here, VS Code will show me the closing tag. So if you observe, there's a box here surrounding this div, and there's also a box here. Now if you notice, all these are highlighted, right? But this one is actually a box with a border. You might have, maybe when you open your own VS Code, it might be easier for you to see it that way, right? So under this box, and then if you notice, look at this drop down icon here. If I click on this to collapse the element for me, so to close it, so that makes it easier for me to see my code. So directly under this box, I want another box. Right? And this other box is this one here. This one that says don't have an account, sign up. Right? So I just use I use a paragraph. Don't have an account. And then, like I said before, you can put a link inside a paragraph. So I'll put a link because this sign up is meant to be a link, right? So, and let me just add IDs to all the links so I can differentiate them, especially the ones that have like different styles, right? So I'll call this login Facebook. This is the link here. I'll give it a class of. Now I'll give it an ID. The reason why I'm giving an ID is because I want to I want to differentiate it from other links, right? I'm not going to be using the styles I'm going to add to the ID. I'm not going to be using it in more than one place, right? So if you want to use styles once, which is an ID, select the elements. But if you want to use styles in multiple places, you use a class. That's why, for example, this second div here, I will give it a class of box. And the reason why I'm giving it a class of box is because this first box here has this border, it has a white background and has this border. The second box as well has the white background and has a border, right? So that's why I'm giving both of them class name of box. So the styles that would add the border and the white background and also the padding as well, they will both be inside the box class. Okay, so let's look at the results. Yeah, so we have this. So everything looks very ugly for now, right? But we're concerned about the HTML. And then we have this text gets the app. Gets the app. And then we have the two images. Right, so let's put them in a div. We can call it ideally this image and this image, they are meant to be links. So it's meant to be that like when I click on this image, it's meant to take me to the App Store. When I click on this image, it's meant to take me to Google Play. Right. So there will be links, right, and they will be side by side each other. But links are inline, right? So that's not an issue. So I'll create the first link. Now in this case, I don't need to add a text inside because the content of the link is actually an image, right? So I'll add image here, an image tag. The A tag needs an href attributes, right? Then maybe just to identify it, I'll give this an ID of okay, no, there's no need for an ID actually, but I can give the image an ID of, let's say, store image. No, I'll give it a class. Now everything I'm doing here, like all the class names I'm giving, the class names I'm assigning to elements, there's a reason for it. Now I'll call this store image. I don't know if the name makes sense, but just bear with me. Right now, the reason why I'm giving this a class of store image is because now I know that I'm going to have to specify the width and height of this image. I already know that, unless the image might be too big or too small or something, right? And most likely the image, I'm also going to have to specify the image of this second one. Most likely they'll be the same size, right? So I'm going to give the two of them. Okay, I've not given this a source attribute. So I give the source attribute of okay, I have not added the image yet. So I'll just add the two images now. The image for App Store and the image for Google Play. It's on my desktop. So I just copy them. Okay. Yeah, this is the one for App Store for Google Play here. This is one for the App Store here. So just copy them into Instagram clone, which is the name of my website. Right, so now they are here. So the first one is App Store, right? So I'll just say /images/App Store the PNG. Then for the second one, I can just copy and paste, right? Whatever helps you save time. And you'll notice I'm adding spaces in between the elements. Is to make it very readable, make it easy for me to read, right? Right, so I can call this div here just to make it readable. I might not use the class for anything, but I can give it the class of um, store links. Yeah, give the class. I can give the class of store links. Right, so I'll change this to googleplay.png. So if I check the website, all right, now you can see this is really large, and this one is even more large, right? So in on second thoughts, I'm going to give. So I'll give two of them different IDs so I can differentiate them. Because it's very possible that the size of this might need to be different from the size of this because they are two different images, right? So I'll call this App Store image, and I'll call this Google Play image. I'll make it an ID. Okay, now the next thing is now all these links here, right? Now to do that, I'll wrap all of them. Now I think that this is, you can classify this as a footer, right? This box here, everything here is part of the footer, right? So I'll create a footer element. Inside the footer, we need to have these links. Now these are navigation links, right? And for that, there's a semantic element here called nav, right? Okay, I'm not quite sure if this element is appropriate. Now, the nav element is meant to be used for, okay, represent a section of a page. VS Code is giving me an help here, saying the nav element represents a section of a page that links to other pages, right? So we can use nav here. And inside nav, we'll have links. We'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, I'm not going to write all these links because I'm too lazy for that, right? So I'll just write maybe like 3 or 4 or 5. I'll write 5 of them. Meta, about, jobs, blogs, help. Then I'll just write one more. You can write 2 more. API and privacy. API and privacy. Okay. So under that we now have this. Now this is a drop down, right? It's a drop down. So the user is going to be able to select a language using this. Right. Now for this, I want the two to be side by side, right? So I think I'll use a. Now I don't know if, okay, yeah. So I'll create a div for both of them, and then have this drop down. Now I talked about the select tag, right? Did I? I think I did. So the select tag is used for making a component, something you can select and then choose from an option, right? So the select tag usually has option children, which are option elements, right? So the only option we can see in the image is English bracket UK. Sorry about that. And then there'll probably be Just say Yoruba. Say Igbo. Say Hausa. Yoruba UK. Funny. Igbo UK. Is there a UK version of Igbo and Yoruba? And then this is a French. Okay. Right, so let's take a look at it just to be sure I do not do rubbish. Right, so okay, this stuff here. Okay, alright, so you see here English UK, but they're on a new line. Why is that? They're on a new line. Okay, that was because of D. This one raised their hand. Okay, no. Right, so the reason why they're on a new line is because I put them in divs, right? Put them into separate divs, did I? Okay, they are meant to be in the same div. Okay, Ricky, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. If you put them like in the same div, you can use span for one.
Okay, let me even take.
Like put one inside span.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I think nav is a block level element. So regardless of how I do it, it's going to fall onto a new line because of the nav here. Nav is a block level element, right? But I need nav to be here because of that's what my code needs to be semantic, right? Okay, maybe for now I'll do an exception. There'll be an exception to this. Let's see. All right, so let me just rapidly respond like Ricky said. Now this is not the proper way to do it. The reason why I'm doing this is because I've not explained some concepts in CSS. There's actually something called flexbox, and that's the next thing that would cover. I was hoping we would cover flexbox in this class, but time has gone. We have just 8 minutes left. Right, so for now I'll just do Jomo. I would use span, right? That's even if it works, let's see. Okay, so using span does the job, right? But it's not the proper way to do it. I'm just doing this to get the results. For now, I'll show you the proper way to do it in the next class, right? Okay, so yeah, so I think that's all the content. So now we can start styling the fun parts, right? Okay, so let's start styling. Now, the first thing we need to style is we have this box here. And the box has a white background, right? So we use background color. You can say white, but I like to say FFF. Okay, someone raised their hand. Go ahead, Chisum.
Sir, how about the copyright that is
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you for. Oh yes, that was actually that was a mistake on my part. This nav here is meant to be on a new line, and then the select and the copyright are meant to be beside each other. Sorry about that. So that means I was doing the right thing before. So I can change this back to in. Yeah, yeah. So this is the way it's meant to be. So beside the select, there's meant to be the copyright, and I'll use. No, I don't know. I don't think the select is block. I think it's inline, right? So for the copyright, I'll use a HTML element called small. Now small is used for copyright, specifically for copyright. And then there's something called HTML entities. I think I explained that, right? So I use this HTML entity, ampersand copy semicolon. That's the code for generating that copyright icon. And then it says 2022 Instagram from Meta. 2022 Instagram from Meta. Okay, right, so we have that here. We have everything here, right? So it's looking good. Okay, so now for the fun part, the styling, right? So for the first thing we need to do is we need to give this box a background color of white. So it might be hard to see, but if you look here, this is gray, this is white, right? So that's because everything here is in the box, right? Now you also notice that this box is only a fraction of the screen. It's not taking the full width, right? So we want to give it a width, and we give it a width. Now generally it's not advisable to give divs like this a height. The default behavior of HTML and CSS is that based on the content you add inside your divs, that's going to increase the height, right? So most times you don't want to specify the height, except you want to make it scrollable, that when the height is exceeded, you want to be able to scroll. But in this case, we don't need that, right? So we won't specify height. We'll only specify width. Now, if you were working with a design, if you're working with a Figma design, you can just click on the box and to show you the width that you need. But in our case, we're working with a picture, right? So I'll just use Jomo. I'll just put this box here to measure the width. Alright, so it's 350 pixels wide. Right, so I'll specify the width here. Let's say 350 pixels. But I'll specify the height. Alright, so if you look at this now, see this box here, it's 350 pixels wide. Alright, but if you look at our design here, it's in the middle, right? So you remember when I explained margin, I think in the class before the last class, I told you that one of the ways that you can center a div. Now this is a div here. We want the div to be in the middle. One of the ways you can center a div is by using margin, right? By saying margin left auto and margin right auto. Now this is very important. You should remember this. You most likely need this, right? So by using margin left auto and margin right auto, you can center a div, right? So now this is in the center because we use margin left auto, margin right auto. And then I just noticed that this, okay, this is weird. We have phone number, password. This is meant to be a button, but instead I have an empty input. Okay, it's meant to be a check. Okay, I think it's meant to be a checkbox. Yeah, that was my mistake, right? Yeah, and then we want the login button to be on a new line, so we'll just add a line break here before the button. Before this button, we had the line break here. Right, so yeah, that looks better. Right, so while getting a bit closer, now another thing you'll notice is there's space between the contents. Now the contents in this case, the content of this div is all the elements inside. So there's a spacing between the contents and the border, right? So we use padding for that, right? Remember I explained that padding is the spacing. What's happening? I'm trying to zoom out, but I can't zoom out. That's weird. Okay, I can zoom out now. Alright, so the padding is the spacing between the border. The border is this gray line here, and the contents. The contents in this case is the input elements, or all the elements here. So again, I'm going to use Joma to get the size. So 40 pixels. The padding, the left and the right padding, because the left padding and the right padding here should be the same. So we'll just make it 40 pixels. Right, so we're still working with the box selector. So padding left 40 pixels, padding right 40 pixels. For the top and bottom padding, we have like a small bottom padding here, but here it looks as though we have a large top padding, but I won't do it that way, right? So what I'll do instead is I'll just have a very tiny, I'll make the padding at the top to be equal to the padding at the bottom here, and then I'll make there to be a margin between this image and the top. I don't know if that made sense. So it makes sense when I do it, right? So I could come here and say padding top, Alright, so let me get the size here for this padding. So it's 23 pixels. Right, so 23 pixels for the padding top, padding bottom, 23 pixels. So instead of doing all this, having to say padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom, there's a shorthand for this, right? The first shorthand is, I can say padding, and then the first value is going to be the, I'm not even very sure again, I think it's the top. That'll be 40 pixels. Yeah, 40 pixels for the top. Then for the right padding, that's going to be, no, for the top I said 23 pixels. For the right to be 40 pixels. Then so the pattern is top right, bottom left. Let me just comment that here. Top right, bottom left. Okay, so that's the pattern. Top right, bottom left. So 23 pixels for the top, 40 pixels for the right. Then we want 23 pixels because I want the top and the bottom to have the same padding. Generally, you would want that top and the bottoms, you want the paddings on top and bottom to be the same. Then you generally also want the padding on the left and right to be the same. So the right will have a padding of 40 pixels, the left also have a padding of 40 pixels. Right? So if I save this, alright, yeah. So you see the padding on the left and right is larger than the padding on the top and bottom, right? Yeah, so it's already looking a bit nice now. Excuse me. Now the next thing you would notice is, okay, I think the box here kind of looks bigger than what is on my screen. So let me make the box a bit bigger. I said 350 pixels, let's make it 450. Yeah, that looks better, right? And then you also notice that there's a space between the box here, this box, and the top of the browser viewport. There's a slight space between this box and this, right? So for that, we'll add a margin top, right? So we see margin top. Let's say it'll be, let's just say 100 pixels or 90 pixels, right? And margin bottom, like I said, top and bottom generally you want them to be the same. Right now, even this shorthand, remember I showed you that this is a shorthand here. There's an even shorter way to write this. Now, whenever you have the top and the bottom as the same value, and the right and the left as the same value, there's a shorter way to write, and the shorter way is the first value will be for the top and bottom, the second value will be for the right and left, right? So in this case, the padding, the top and bottom is 23 pixels, while right and left is 40 pixels, right? So that's shorter than this long line here. So for this case, in this case, this is top, stroke bottom, then space, then left stroke right. Okay. Yeah, I'm just leaving all these comments to help you remember. I think a better way to put this would be padding, then this. Yeah, I think that's a better way to write that. Okay, yeah, now so the same thing applies to the margin as well, right? There's a shorthand for. So if you notice, left and right are both auto, top and bottom are both 90 pixels. So a shorthand way of writing this would be to say margin, and the first value will be for top and bottom, and that will be, what's the value I said again? Okay, 90 pixels, right? So 90 pixels. Now to go back, what I just did was Control Z, right? And then to move forward, Shift Control Z. So 90 pixels auto. So top and bottom have margin of 90 pixels, and then left and right have a margin of auto. Right, so if I save this and go to my browser, alright, so it's looking better now. I want to reduce it. the top margin here. Let's reduce something like 70. Yeah, I think I prefer that. All right, so the next thing is this box has a border, right? Now to get the color of the border, so I use another Jomo. Now once you start learning Figma, you would know how to do all this geometry. But for now, just watch me do it. Alright, so I'll get the color here where it says fill. So now for the border, you also need to know the for the border has three properties. It has border width. Just by looking at it, I can tell that the border width is 1 pixel. Right? And then it also has border color, which is what I used Joomla to get db. And then it also has border style. So the border style is solid. That's like the most common border style. Right, so if I go to my page, all right, so we see the border here, and it's already looking very similar to the page, or it's already looking a bit similar to the page. Right, now there's a shorthand for all this, and that's just the border. The first one will be the border width, second one will be border style, third one will be border color, which is db. Right, so I can remove this, and we'll get the same result. Okay, now the next thing is this Instagram logo, which is an image, is in the middle, but our own is by the left, so we don't want that, right? Now remember, I gave the Instagram logo a class of logo. Actually, I'll change it to an ID because I'm using it only once, right? So under the box styles, I'll just, now we use the hash selector for ID, right? So just say box, and then I'll say, now remember I said one way. Okay, what did I just do? Oh, sorry. Now remember I already specified styles here using the class selector, but I just changed this from a class to ID, so let's update this here. And then instead of so over here, I can just add the new styles I want to add, right? So remember that I said that one of the ways of centering divs or centering HTML elements generally is by saying margin left auto, margin right auto, right? And then I also want it to have a top and bottom margin, right? There's a space between here and here, so I'm guessing that space, or not that I'm guessing, I'll just use this, so this space should be around 100 pixels, right? So I'll just do that together, right? So I want a top and bottom margin of 100 pixels. Now I want left and right to be auto, so that it to be centered, right? So if I do that, okay, so something's happening now. All right, so sorry. So it's not that, first of all, that 100 pixels is too much. So let's make it 50 pixels. Okay, let's see. Let's make it 30 pixels. Yeah, that's better. Now, apparently margin auto is not working, right? So let's make that 0. Now, sorry, let me just check the browser. Okay. All right, so the reason why margin auto did not work is because images are inline elements, right? And so you can't use, there are some things you can't really use margin on like you can't use that margin auto on inline elements, right? So instead what we're going to do is, now whenever I use the text align property, text align also works on images as well, right? So if I use text align center, that should work. Fingers crossed. Okay, that did not work. That's because I'm meant to put it in the box. Yeah, so that worked, right? Now some of this, you might be wondering that, okay, why would I be using text align for an image? Yeah, but that's the way it is. All right, so text align works on image. So one of the ways you can center your image is by using text align, or another way you can do it is you can wrap the image with a div and then center the div using margin auto. Does that make sense? Let me just show you what I mean by that so that you know different ways to achieve the same results. Okay, so if you even look at it, okay, there's an I wrapped the logo in an header. So one thing I can do is I can specify the size of this header and then put margin auto, margin left auto, margin right auto, but I'll just stick to the simpler method. The simpler method is simply to say text align center here. Now I'm putting text align center inside the, I'm specifying that in the box because, sorry for this quotation marks, is JavaScript, sorry. Yeah, so I'm specifying text align center inside the box selector. The reason why is because the rest of the design, if you look at it, okay, this is also text is also centered, right? I also want to center this and I also want to center this, right? So I just put the text align center for everything, but it's also going to center this this save login info, and I don't want that, right? But however, I want it for this login with Facebook, and then this forgotten your password. And then I noticed that login with Facebook and forgotten your password are on the same line, right? But I don't want that. So I'm going to add a BR. Now the reason why they're on the same line is because both of them are inline elements, right? So they can share space. Okay, so now they're on different lines. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll need to style the inputs, right? So the first thing you notice about the input is there's no padding between the content. The content here is whatever you type inside the input and the border here. So it's very like close to the border, right? So I'll just add some padding now. So if I just use Jomo again, so the top and bottom padding is 13 pixels, right? So I'm going to style the input. All right, so I want to style these two inputs, right? I want to give them the same style. The checkbox will have a different input. It will have a different style because it's a checkbox, not a text input, right? So let me give the input, these two inputs, I'll just give them a class, right? So I'll show you a trick for in VS Code, right? So if in VS Code, if you hold down Alt and click on multiple places, you can type in multiple places at the same time. So if I type something, so I'm typing in multiple places at the same time, right? So that's a trick that can be useful for you. So right now I want to add a class here on this line and I also want to add a class on this line. So I'll hold down Alt and click on this so I can add a class in the two places at the same time. So I'll give it a class of text-inputs. Right, so I'll go back to my CSS and then here under the box, just have a class of text-inputs. And so I want to give it a padding, a top and bottom padding of, what's the value I said? 13 pixels, right? Okay, so padding top 13 pixels, padding bottom 13 pixels. Alright, so if I go to my browser, okay, I'm zoomed in a lot, right? So that's why it looks weird. Alright, so it looks much better now. Alright, but there's also left and right padding. I'm guessing that this will be like 8 pixels. Okay, 9 pixels. But we'll make it 8 pixels. So padding left 8 pixels, padding right 8 pixels. If I save this and check. Alright, so it looks a bit better. Now, another thing is the inputs actually take up the full width here. Aside the padding, right? It doesn't touch the edge because of the padding, but it takes up the full width. Right, so I would say width should be 100%. Now, I don't know if I told you, but along with pixels, rems, ems, you can also use percentages, right? So percentage is going to be the percentage of the parent's elements, right? So what I'm selecting right now is this input. The parent element is the form, right? So it's going to be 100% of the form's width. Right, so if I check my page, all right, so see, so it's 100% of the form's width, and the form's width is actually 100% of its own parent's element. That's the box, right? So it's going to be 100% of the box, aside the padding. All right, so it's already looking closer to, and if you now look at this, as I'm styling this box here, this is also getting styled, right? That's because I use class, the same class here. So that means I don't have to do extra work. As I'm styling this, automatically this gets styled, right? So now the next thing is there's meant to be a space. If I look at my design, there's a space between, okay, before that, um my input has a border, this brown border here. It also has a background color, right? So I want to change that. So using Figma, I can get the colors of the border. Like I said, don't worry about how I'm getting the colors for now. By the time you start watching the tutorial, sorry about that. By the time you start watching the tutorials, you would understand how I'm getting the colors, right? So border color, again, just by looking at it, I can see that the border width should be like 1 pixel, right? So I'll say 1 pixel, and this is usually the solid. And color is db. And then I'll also use this opportunity to chip in some. So if you notice, there's a particular color I've used like twice for borders. I've used this db twice, right? So there's something called, should I mention this? Okay, I won't mention this for now, right? I'll mention this for now. I'll mention it later. Alright, so look at this here. Where I said padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right. So I can rewrite this as padding then 13 pixels, 8 pixels. Right, same result. Okay. Yeah, so I've added the border here for my inputs. And if you notice, if you look at it, so like I said before, that you need to pay attention to details when you are as a developer or as a front-end developer. What we're doing now for now is still front-end. But like I said at the very big, even before our class started out, even if you want to specialize in backend, you still need to know the basics of front end. So what we're doing is basics of front end actually, right? So, but when you are doing front end, you need to pay attention to details. Now, if you look at our own page, you see that the inputs are just like boxes, right? But if you look at the design, what we're trying to follow, you see that this is a bit curved, right? And that's one of the reasons why I would say that you should learn UI UX design, because if you learn UI UX design, it makes you pay attention to details. So you would easily spot that, oh, there's a curve in this box here. So it's not just a plain box, it has a curve, right? So we can get that effect using something called border radius, and you usually specify a value in pixels or rems or percentage. So from experience, I know that it's going to be like 2 pixels or 1 pixel, because it really, the larger the value, the larger the curve, right? So okay, so let's make it like 4 pixels. All right, yeah. So if you look at now, it's curved. All right, so the next thing is there's a background. Background is FA. So say background color FA. All right, so it looks just like it. If you want to be really detailed, which you should be, you notice that the text inside the input is bold. That's why I say you have to pay attention to details as a front-end developer, as a web developer. I just did something. Okay, yeah. So if you notice, the text inside the input is bold. If you look at our own, okay, it's actually almost the same thing. Right? So you can ignore that, right? But this one is a bit more bold. I didn't even consider the fonts they're using. Maybe when we're done, we'll do that. But it looks like we're using the same font. I think it's Arial. So let me just check the fonts they're using. So how am I going to check the fonts they're using? I'm going to check the fonts they're using browser developer tools, right? Right, so if I click on this, if I just check here, there's an Apple system UI. Okay, they're using Helvetica Arial Sans Serif. Let me confirm. Okay, they're using this font. I can actually copy this. They're actually using like the default fonts, right? So I can go to my body tag and then change the fonts here. Now don't be intimidated by this long name. What it simply means is, first of all, use this font, Apple system. If you don't find this font, I'm not sure if this is correct. Wait, let me check first. Okay. Yeah, so what they are saying with this long line here is they are simply saying, first of all, check for this Apple system font. If you find it, use it. If you don't find it, use this Blink Mark system font. If you don't find it, use Sergio UI font. Right? But you notice that this is wrapped in quotation marks, and the reason for that is because probably there's a space in between. Right? If you don't find Sergio UI font, use Roboto. If you don't find Roboto, pardon me, use Helvetica. If you don't find Helvetica, use Arial. If you don't find Arial, use sans serif. Okay, yeah, so that's what they are saying. Okay, yeah, so I think that the font here is a bit more bold than the one here, but we can ignore that because it's like a very minute detail. Right, the next thing is there's a margin in between this input and this input. Right, the margin is just going to be around 8 pixels. You can tell just by looking at it. So we just say margin bottom 8 pixels.